Okay, so welcome everybody to this session. It's a privilege always to introduce Randall and Mary. Randall Hardy is a home educator, had a lot of experience. How many children was it, Randall? 5?
6.
6, sorry, missed one. And grandchildren, and he's still going strong. And sorry?
Plenty of grandchildren, yes.
Grandchildren. And are they all home educated as well?
Not all of them, but the vast majority have been, or are being, or will be.
Right, so still firmly entrenched in home educating circles, shall we say? And
Definitely
obviously
entrenched.
Very adept at keeping up to speed with the political stuff that's happening. And that's what this session is all about. So please do ask any questions in the chat. If you want to take your name off or take your picture off, then that's fine for the recording, but I think Randall would appreciate a face or two to talk to. But we're really looking forward to what you have to say, Randall, although I suspect it may not be very positive, but it's good. We're all about truth, aren't we? The truth bomb.
We are, yeah.
Maybe we need a truth bomb in order to wake us up and respond to what's happening. So I'll hand over to you, and we're really looking forward to what you've got to say, Randall. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth, very much. Welcome to those who are here, and welcome to people who are going to do that. It looks like I've been spotlighted, so that's fine. Let me share screen, and oops. Right, let me get back to where I was. Right, welcome everybody. Again, now I've got the shared screen sorted. The current state of home education politics in the UK is what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to move you where I can see you all better. That will have to do for now. It was a talk that I gave a title for with just 2 items on it, which was the 10-minute rule bill and promised guidance expected. That was in 2 areas. That was in Wales and in England. But there's now 4 items on the list of what I want to cover today. There is the 10-minute rule bill. There is new Welsh statutory guidance, which has now been published. There's a promised revision of English guidance. And finally, yesterday there was published improving support for children missing education, call for evidence. So that's what I'm trying to cover today. I just need to call up the chat so I can see if anybody's sending anything. Oh, that's just Ruth. That's fine. Okay. So where are we going now? The 10-minute rule bill on children not in schools registers. It passed its first stage in Parliament on Tuesday. It was presented by Flick Drummond, a Conservative MP. Her speech was a complete recycling of unevidenced fears about home education. Right at the end, she gave a second reading date of the 24th of November. And that was the most important thing she said all the way through this 10-minute event. The bill had no need to be written, printed, or published by Tuesday, and it may never be published. So what's going to happen next? Well, I want to briefly give you the background to 10-minute rule bills. Now it's been approved, it's considered to be a private member's bill. And there are currently 260 private members' bills before Parliament. The page there is from the Parallel Parliament, great resource, and that's where I got that figure of 260 from. I began to look through the list for how many of the bills had a second reading date of the 24th of November and gave up. So I used the page search for the date, and I had 120 returns. There are 120 bills due to have their second reading on the 24th of November. From Lord Solly's bill reaching the the House of Commons, I know what happens on such days. They get through one, perhaps two, and occasionally three bills on a day like that. And this bill has to go at the end of the queue because all the others were there first. So effectively, it's not going to have a second reading on the 24th of November. And Drummond knew that when the whips gave her that date. Important fact. Here's a very useful website, the MP's Guide to Procedure. You can find it on Parliament's website, and it's a guide for rookie MPs to tell them how Parliament works. It's really good. And here it says, private members bill at the end of a session. And I'll read it to you just because it's in small print. It says, if your bill has completed all its stages by the end of the session, it will be sent for royal assent and become law. If it hasn't, that is, if it hasn't completed all its stages by the end of the session, it will fall at the end of the session and will not be able to go any further. But they can bring it back in the next session. So here's the key point that we need to think about. When is the current session of Parliament going to end? There are several sessions between a general election. They normally have one session covering 12 months, and they normally end in the spring. But in December last year, Rishi Sunak announced that this session would be extended until the autumn. And the latest word on the street comes from the Hansard Society website, published on the 9th of May, a long article there, but it says that the landmark for this present session would be passed on the 10th of May. No date for the end of this now extended session has yet been confirmed, but it is widely expected that Parliament will be prorogued for a new King's Speech in November. So let's put all this together. 120 bills, trying to get a second reading and then to have all the other stages in the Commons and then in the House of Lords before the end of November. And they've only going to be any chance of a second reading on the 24th. This bill is not going to happen. Over. Drummond knew that when the Whip's office gave her that date. The fact the bill isn't happening, though, is irrelevant because it was always a lobbying device and it still is. The very next day, on Wednesday, yesterday, Robin Walker, who's not only an MP, he's the chair of the Education Committee, stood up during Prime Minister's question time, and it was actually the Deputy Prime Minister he asked, and there'd been comment about education, and he picked up on that, and he said he wanted to strongly commend to the Deputy Prime Minister and to the government the 10-minute rule bill presented by my honourable friend for Meon Valley, that is Flick Drummond. It has cross-party support, delivers on key recommendations of the Education Select Committee and the Children's Commissioner. The government should adopt it as soon as possible. And if you can see the picture, you can see a very pleased face hiding behind the portcullis from Parliament TV. In the bottom right-hand corner, that is Flick Drummond. Walker is not saying to them, this bill needs to go forward. He is saying, there's a bill here ready to go, adopt it as soon as possible. He is lobbying that next year, after the King's Speech, the government will put these things into a bill. I don't think they will, but I can't guarantee that. But we need to be aware the bill is dead, but the agenda lives on. And one place it lives on really strongly is in the new draft Welsh guidance. It doesn't say draft on the front, but on the first page with any content on it makes clear they are draft. They were published last Friday. They're expected to come into force in September. A big difference is that the previous guidance was non-statutory. This edition is headlined as statutory guidance. That used to be very significant. The courts have watered down that significance, but for local authorities, it means what they read in this set of guidance, they should do, they must do unless they can find a valid reason for not doing it. Where non-statutory guidance is guidance which tells them what the government thinks they would be best practice for them to do, and so on. So here we are, we've got this. What's inside these guidance? Well, it's too long to go through, but on the same day, the Education Minister, Jeremy Miles, published a statement, a written statement announcing them. And I've got two extracts from it. The second paragraph there, the statutory guidance helps to ensure that all children are supported to access the universal services and benefits normally available to children and young people in mainstream education. It also helps clarify existing requirements in law and the respective responsibilities upon parents and local authorities to ensure consistency of practice for all children, irrespective of how they receive their education. So the phrase I've highlighted there is to ensure consistency of practice for all children. I'm not sure home educating parents want that. There's some bad practices goes on in state education. The government wants to make sure all children have the same standard of service. Big question that, but it's an important signpost to the thinking behind this guidance. Lower down, it says this, and this is a real key point. The guidance sets out the Welsh Government's expectation that in order to determine whether the education provided by a parent is suitable, and the local authority should see and communicate with the child. Statutory guidance, the local authority should see and communicate with the child. That is a significant change in the law. Seeing and communicating with the child not only provides an opportunity for the local authority to better understand how the child learns and what areas of interest of learning they're interested in, it also provides an opportunity for home educated children to share their views on the education they are receiving. When does any child in school get sat down by a local authority person and asked, how do you find school? Do you like coming to school? Would you like to stop coming to school? Home educated children need special provision. They need it, according to Jeremy Miles, because this is key to upholding the rights of all children to participate in decisions making that affects their lives. I'm not sure that's true, but we'll leave it for another time. Food for thought. By the way, let me say, I know I'm going through these wordy slides pretty quickly. The best thing to do, this is being recorded, watch it back later, and when you get to one of these wordy slides, pause the video, you can read them. it's a great facility, folks. What is in the body of it? Well, it signals the direction for travel in Wales, and I believe strongly in England. The two administrations work hand in hand. Excuse my typo there. The guidance uses children missing education legislation to justify seeing the child to ensure that the education is deemed suitable according to the state standards. And it justifies taking that action by selective appeal to the United Nations Charter on the Right of the Child. Significantly, twice it cites the unsuccessful judicial review against Portsmouth City Council to validate what they are proposing. And from that, it therefore is clear that the Welsh government is seeking to take advantage of the space created by the 2019 English guidance. And it's important to note that the judge in that case said that that case did not challenge that guidance. So they're walking into a space they think is available, and I question whether it is. I'm moving on to the third thing now. This had been promised before I wrote my title. Revision of English guidance. Nick Gibb, Schools Minister, on the 27th of March, in a Westminster Hall debate on registers for home educated children triggered by the Petitions Committee. I can't go into the whole thing. The key thing I want to highlight is he said the department will review our guidance for local authorities and parents later this year. That process has begun. We don't know we do know the present guidance is non-statutory. We don't know if this edition will be statutory and match those published in Wales. I can tell you the process has begun, and they've invited selected home educators to participate in a pre-consultation roundtable along with local authorities and safeguarding stakeholders. They've not put out a list for anybody to volunteer for that. They've gone to people whose name they say they collected under the schools bill. They were putting together a implementation forum, and some people volunteered for that. My personal view was that was a fool's errand. They're only going to use people to validate what they want to say, not listen. And I suspect this roundtable will be the same. There was a provisional date put forward originally for later this month. I don't know if that will happen or not. They've clamped down on what participants can say, right? And if there is an expectation that once that's finished, there'll be a consultation on the new draft guidance. So what happens next? I suspect that consultation will come either over the summer or early autumn. The new guidance will probably be published before the end of the year. What will be the difference? I have no idea. Will it be similar to Wales? I suspect so, but there will be differences. So the fourth item to drop on your plate was published yesterday. It is a call for evidence. It's not a consultation, it's a call for evidence on improving support for children missing education. You may think my child is not missing education. The state believes any child who's not in school is in danger of missing education, whether they're on a school roll or not. They believe a child in school attending classes is not missing education, when quite often it's going over the top of their heads or around their emotions. So in this document, a very quick glance has revealed about 12 meaningful references to elective home education. The ones I'm not counting are the ones in the footnotes and in the index. There's 2 such references to children's not in school registers. There is a whole section of 3 paragraphs and 2 questions on elective home education. I'll skip the top one. The middle one reads, if a local authority deems a child is not enrolled at school and is not receiving suitable education through elective home educated, they are considered to be CME. Local authorities should take action to address this. No arguments with that whatsoever. But then they go on to say, we are interested in understanding how elective home education is managed by local authorities and how they determine whether children are receiving a suitable education or whether they are CME. That moves the goalposts from where they used to be, but to where they've been creeping over the last 4 or 5 years. The goalpost used to be that the local authorities should assume that a home educated child is receiving a suitable education unless they have reasons to think they are not. Now, since the 2019 guidance, the word going out to local authorities is you cannot assume they're receiving a suitable education. You have to verify that they are before you do not class them as children missing education. There are 2 questions, as I said. Question 25, you may see it's a very light oval round it. It is not a question for parents. It is a question for local authorities. And they want to know what they are doing at present. That is what this question is about. What are local authorities doing at present to determine that a child is being suitably educated and isn't missing education? I'm not going to go through that list because of time, but it's the type of things we know what's going on and we may not know what's going on, but that is what's happening. 26 is more significant. This is asking local authority what other measures they want in place to identify unsuitable elective home education more effectively. I've just highlighted two of them, but the second one, which I haven't highlighted, is clarity regarding suitable education. In the Westminster Hall debate, Nick Gibb said, if a child is studying for national exams or following the national curriculum, that could be deemed as evidence that they are receiving a suitable education. The Welsh guidance is pressing harder on a definition of suitable education. So that is an area where there is big concern. It is going to be a tick box exercise. Does this child meet particular standards? The 2 questions I have asked are the same one, but slightly different. Duty on parents to notify local authority of decision to electively home educate. Duty on parent to notify school of decision to electively home educate. Now, when a parent deregisters a child from school, it is good practice that they notify the school, and the school is under a legal responsibility to inform the local authority whenever a child is taken off their roll. So you may think that's already covered. No, it isn't. There is no current legal duty placed on parents to tell the school the child is being taken off their roll. In fact, they can't be. A parent doesn't have to tell the school or the local authority they are deregistering a child. But if they don't, the child, they could be pursued because they're not causing the child to attend school. So that is a valid difference. There is no duty on parents, but there is a good reason why they should notify the school. But there's something bigger in the first of these two. Duty on parents to notify local authority of decision to home educate. Presently, no parent, if their child hasn't been in school, has to tell anybody they are going to home educate. Historically, that is because that decision always has been and remains the responsibility of the parent. But this is shifting it to say that if you've got a pre-tute school child and you decide you're not going to send them to a school, you have to notify the local authority. That is what the government wants to know, if that would help local authorities. They don't want to know what you and me think about this. They want to know what local authorities. This question is also for local authorities. But there is a question you can answer, because at the top it says this one is for all. It's in a different section. It's the mopping up area, and it's 34. It says, how, if at all, do you believe the process of identifying children missing education can be improved? And the last specified action is a system of registration for children not in school. So that comes in there. But I hope you can see something of the flow of where all this is going. I want to go back and give you a bigger picture. What's driving this? We've got two administrations with a very similar conversation going on in both. They are wanting to bring in measures that makes the state the ultimate arbiter of the education a child is provided with. Why do they believe that is their responsibility? Well, if you go to the Welsh guidance, where it's set out very neatly, and it packs it out in the beginning sections, in the introduction to the guidance, 1.3 reads, this guidance is informed by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It has been developed to ensure that all children in Wales, including those who are educated at home, receive their rights as accorded by the UNCRC. I don't know what your views are on the UNCRC and on human rights and the rights of the child. The Welsh Government wants to make sure your child has their rights delivered to them. They cite 4 articles from the UNCRC in relevance. They are 2, 3, 6, and 12. They highlight Article 28, which declares the right of all children to receive an education. What they do not highlight is that article was sold to tell states that they should not deny an education to any child. Many states still do. States where children are provided with an education by anybody, or where a dictator or an armed force take them into as child soldiers. That is what that's about. Article 29 declares that the education should develop each child's personality and talents to the full. Just 1 minute. It should encourage children to respect their own and other cultures. If you go back to the school bill and look at the impact assessment, you will see there that there was a very clear statement from the Department of Education that the schools bill would have a negative effect on, well, it would have a positive effect on children from orthodox religious backgrounds, because it would open them up to things like teaching about gender and sexuality. But that statement in itself shows a complete lack of respect for the culture of those children and the culture they come from, because the values of that culture are not the values of the modern state. So that might not be a direct issue in Wales, apart from a large Muslim population. And many Muslims do not want to adopt the value of the state, and they should be free to do so, because if any group loses its cultural right to continue its cultural values, then all groups will lose it. Let's move on. I'm not going to read this one, but there's some measures set out there. If you're reading anything like guidance or any government things, try and find a bit of time to explore the footnotes. You will find a mine of awful things hiding there. And that's all I can say. There are some things that never get publicized, never get picked up, but they reveal the agenda behind it. So do look at things like that, either in the Welsh government or, as I say, the document that were behind the school bill do need reading. Article 12, they say, provides a right for children to express their views for due weight to be given to their views in accordance with the age and the maturity of the child. The Welsh government have received a document that tells them quite clearly that this article refers to court proceedings, to legal proceedings where children are going to be affected. And those children's views in the judgment of the court should be taken into account. They do not explain that here. They are widening the scope of that to any activity a child does. Somebody needs to check that their views are being taken into account, right? But they do say this does not, however, give children authority over parents. Well, that's thankful. But it does say local authorities, through their services supporting the participation of children, should consider how the individual and collective voices of home-educated children can be heard. By whom? Don't parents listen to their children? This is implying that only state employees can hear the voice of the child. This is a problem. Back to Article 28 and 29. I'll just do the bolded bit. All right. However, one of the underlying principles of the UNCRC is that the best interest of a child, and Article 3 of the UNCRC requires all children to think about, all adults to think about their decision will affect and to do what is best for the child. So we're here talking about the best interests of a child. Who decides what is in the best interest of the child? Normally it's the parent. But we're in a state, and in Britain, Tony Blair's government became the catalyst for this, where parents are no longer trusted and a professional person is the only person who knows what's in the best interest of a child. So I think this might be my final slide on this quick trip through human rights in the Welsh guidance. This goes back to what I highlighted earlier. In section 425, it says, seeing the child to discuss their education provision and access to resources accords with a number of articles in the UNCRC, such as the child's right to an education and to fulfill their potential, including the rights to express their views and to receive appropriate information in order to make informed choices, to support and provision to play and leisure activities, and to be kept safe. A state employee needs to interview your child in order to make sure you as their parents are maintaining their rights. And until you prove yourself to them, they are saying we cannot accept your word because you're a parent. What is the driver behind that? Well, I'm going to summarize it like this: the state's view of the children. This is not a quote. I was not in a meeting, but before COVID, BC, somebody I know was in a meeting which Department for Education officials were present, and somebody raised the matter of the role of families and the responsibility and authority of families over children. And the response came back along these lines, and this is not an exact quote: children are autonomous, right-bearing citizens, and it's the state's responsibility to protect them. Brackets from me, from their parents. Let me read that again. Children are autonomous, right-bearing citizens, and it's the state's responsibility to protect them. Do you agree with that? I don't. I'll tell you what I believe. This is my view of children. Children are not autonomous from birth. Fact. It is the responsibility and privilege of parents to nurture them into autonomy and to provide protection for them along that journey. This is chalk and cheese. This is the nub of the matter. Do we want to surrender our children to a state that doesn't trust their parents? Or do we want to say we have a responsibility to protect them from a state that, according to Lady Hale, in her judgment on the Scottish Named Person Scheme, said that the first a totalitarian state will seek to place itself between a child and their parents. So what do we want to do? Do you want to let your child be taken over by a totalitarian state? Or are you going to protect them? The choice is yours. I want to stress something here. It's generally agreed that human rights were created after World War II to protect citizens from state oppression. Today, we see them being erroneously used to justify state supervision of family life. Where are we going? Well, I'm doing a little plug. The next session after lunch at 2 o'clock today is called A Truth Depth Charge. It's time for parents to take a stand. And Joshua is sat in this meeting, so if he wants to unmute himself and give a plug for it, he's got a moment to think about it. I want to say to you, folks, if you want to take this further, this is a must-watch session for you going forward. I wanted to do an afternoon session today, and Joshua beat me to it, but I'm more than happy to pass on the baton to him at this point. I think we have to take seriously what's happening. I have to say, I'm not convinced. I think we must try hard. every legal role, but I'm not sure that we're going to find a way to stop this juggernaut. And so parents need to say, what will I do if the state presses forward? Will I give in or will I take a stand? Joshua, what would you like to say about your session? And I'll spotlight myself while you're doing it.
Well, thank you, Randall, and thank you for this session, which has been really helpful. I don't know that I can best you in plugging this afternoon's session. You really helpfully laid out the challenge before us. But essentially, what we'll be trying to do over the course of an hour will be review our options as parents who are concerned about state encroachment into the family, specifically in the area of the education and upbringing of children, and really conduct a thought experiment together about what our options may be if, as you say, the political and the legal means of redress that we have relied upon in the past begin to fail us, as it seems it's entirely possible they may do. And that's not to say it isn't worth continuing to do whatever we can along those channels and in those ways. But it is to think together, what might a truly civil society means of addressing this question of freedom look like? How might parents begin to unite, begin to articulate the freedoms and the rights they already have, quite apart from the state's understanding of its own role, and how might we move forward together? So I'm looking forward to that thought experiment, and also to hearing from others on the question, which I think a lot of us have been thinking about more and more.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you.
Well, folks, for those watching the video, this isn't a largely attended session. I don't know if anybody's got any questions. You can put it in the chat if that's easier than in arriving on screen. But we can have some chat. I apparently have an unread message. No, it's the one from Ruth, which I had read. If there isn't, we can stop the recording and we can chat a little bit longer, or we can go from there. But please tell me where you're at, and if anybody doesn't ask a question very quickly or make a comment, I'll stop the recording.
So I've just put it in the chat, Randall. Could you just say a word on Northern Ireland? What the essential picture is there? Obviously, questions around Stormont and its dysfunction, but I'd be interested to hear what the essential picture is when it comes to these subjects.
The essential picture in Northern Ireland is, and Mary might want to come in here, she's probably got the dates better than me. There was a really bad piece of guidance published, I think in 2014. The local home educating community engaged in Northern Ireland. They don't have local authorities for education. There is one Northern Ireland Education Board. They engaged with them, and I think it was 2018, they published further guidance, which was a lot better. So if you're in the UK at the moment, I would say the safest place to live, as far as home education is concerned, is Northern Ireland. We're not sure. Scotland, which is where you are, Joshua, is still recovering from losing the named person scheme. It's acting half the time as if it's in place, and we don't know what will happen. They will have an election coming up soon, and we don't know what's going to happen politically, but that was the direction of travel there. The named person scheme was exactly what's happening now in England and Wales. It's the same narrative, come at from a different angle, which was one they lost, because that got all parents engaged from the start. In Northern Ireland, that piece of work by the home educators was good, but I'm as I say, I don't know what's going on. I do know that there was freedom for information requests put in 18 months ago by an individual to all the devolved education departments and to the DFE in England, asking each of them asking the devolved departments what contact they'd had with the DFE, and the DFE what contacts they'd had with the devolved things. And we got some useful information. Northern Ireland was one of the least engaged with the DFE, but the next time somebody put in, back came the answer, we can't give you this information, it's too sensitive. So that door has now been shut. They'd left it open, they've now shut it. So we don't know the current state of play, but it is the least under threat at the moment.